During Captain Cook's famous circumnavigation of New Zealand in 1769, he left one notable gap on his map, here at the southwest corner of the South Island, Te Waipounamu, where his ship was blown out to sea by a heavy gale. Cook had to leave a dotted line on a 15-mile stretch of coast that he simply couldn't see. That dotted line is where we will be going on this series of Furthest Frontier. In the summer of 2022, a group of local iwi and heritage professionals set out into the remote wilderness of New Zealand's Fiordland. Their aim was to rediscover important sites from our past and help tell the stories that risk being forgotten. This is an area with a storied past, long a haunt of Māori to whom it was known as Rakituma and Taiari. And it was a place where Māori and Pākehā would encounter each other in dramatic fashion in the years following Cook's visit, when it became known as Preservation and Chalky Inlets. I'm Sean Brosnan from Toitū-Otago Settlers Museum. Join us on this expedition, which celebrates the stories of our furthest frontiers.
Nā te pō ko te ao, tana ko te ao marama, tana ko te ao tūro, tana ko te kore te whiwhia, tana ko te kore te rāwea, tana ko te kore te tā maua, tana ko te kore te mātua, tana ko māku. Ka moi ia maku ki māhorunu ia te a ka puta mai ko raki. Ka moi ia raki ki pukahaaro e te pō, ka puta mai ko auraki. Ko tū te raki whānau. Ui rā ki te maha nui a Maui ko te takata āti hei mauri ora.
Ron Bull is of the Kaitahu tribe from Ōraka Aparima, one of several rūnaka with a vested interest in the Fiordland area. Ron has spent a lot of time in Fiordland, but this is his first time to Taiari and Rakituma.
Whenever we come into this landscape, a lot of the names that are embedded within this landscape come from our waka traditions. And one of those waka was the Takitimu. They came down from the east coast of the North Island in about 1450, we reckon, according to our whakapapa, our genealogy, our layering. And a lot of the names of this place here are related to the people in there. So for example, Tamatea, who was the kaihautu, the skipper of that waka, and events and things that they did when they settled. They met the people that were already in this area, built those relationships, added to the layering, to the whakapapa, added to the stories, but left those instructional names within the landscape that link to the whakapapa, that remind us of who we are. So, you know, once again, when we come in here, the stories and the names that we invoke, they remind us who we are, of our identity in this place.
In Southern Māori creation stories, the landform of the South Island is the waka of Aoraki, an ancestral figure who in his mythological voyagings got stuck on a reef and wrecked. Both the waka and its crew subsequently been turned to stone.
Tales like this are fundamentally oral maps and present an incredible way of imagining the contours of the landscape. In this particular tradition, Aoraki's son, or perhaps his grandson, Tūtaraki Whānau, came searching for his father and discovered the smashed up waka, its stern posts resting at bluff.
Tūtaraki Whānau then set out to reshape the waka become landform to make it fit for people to live on. The waka's raised sides he gouged out with his adze, thereby creating the southern fjords as places of shelter along the wild coastline, replete with fish and birds and plants to provide sustenance for travellers.
Another origin tradition has the South Island been the canoe of Maui, Aoraki's younger half-brother and one of the most famous characters from Polynesian mythology. His association is also recorded here in place names that symbolise an epic impact on the landscape.
This tradition has Maui leaping ashore here at the Tapu Waiumoe, or the footprint of Maui, now called Divide Head, but slipping in the mud and throwing his outstretched arms forward as he fell, thereby creating the two arms on either side of the headland. Moana Whenua Pauri, now known as Edwardson Sound to the west, and Te Koro Whakaunu, now known as Kunara Sound to the east. The hills in between became Te Rereka o Maui, Maui's Leap.
And the stories of Maui talk about stories of tikanga. They tell us how to live within this landscape in a way that keeps everything in balance. When we talk about the stories of a tūtiraki whānau and raki, and that whakapapa story, it tells about the stories of tikanga and how to live in unison and keeping things in balance with nature.
A third waka voyage of exploration that left an imprint on this landscape was led by Tamatea Pokai Whenua, whose name, of course, endures at Tamatea Dusky Sound. His waka, the Takitimu, was also eventually wrecked, becoming the impressive mountain range just east of Lake Manapouri. Later, Tamatea would have some adventures in Rakituma and Taiari as well. The dark colouring of this cliff by Cape Providence, for example, is explained by the name Taka o te Karahu a Tamatea, the falling into the water of Tamatea's tattooing pigment.
And in fact, we refer to Fiordland as Te Roa o te Moko, the pits of the tattooing, to remind us of the stories of when those people came down in 1450.
And when he got soaking wet as well, Chalky Island here was named as Te Horohaka o te Kākahu o Tamatea, the laying out to dry of Tamatea's cloak. Now what these ancient names tell us is that Maori explorers were here early and examined this coastal landscape in detail.
When we talk about Tamatea traditions and how he sort of might have ignored some of the weather conditions, his boat got turned over and he ended up, walking through this landscape and doing things. They tell us about how to read the weather conditions and how to keep everything in balance.
Lots of other Maori names record much more matter-of-factly the sort of resources that we found here, like Pukaherika for the safe swinging anchorage at Coal Island, or Koura for the abundance of crayfish that was to be found here in Otago Retreat, and there were many, many other names of this sort.
They were resource markers in the safe stopping off point on the challenging sea route around to the other sounds, occupied seasonally over hundreds of years by successive waves of Maori in the south.
Rock art's usually associated with some of the earliest peoples of New Zealand, and the experts date most of it as being between 600 and 1,000 years old. Today here in Taiari, Chalky Inlet, our aim is to take Ron to a known site of prehistoric rock art. This is probably one of the most remote sites of early rock art in New Zealand, and it's really visited. The archaeological records haven't been updated for around 40 years, so we're really not sure what state we'll find the cave drawings in, but potentially it'll be a special experience for Ron and the wider team.
So I've been lucky enough to be involved in some projects looking at the caves up in Tiana, and I've been in through Clifton and had a look at the cave drawings there as well. So interacting with those artworks, but coming into this was something else altogether, that immediate connection to that whakapapa of our people down in this place here. That was the thing that struck me, but I think even more so the clarity of the pieces. Just they were there and they were speaking out loud whatever it is they were trying to say. But the mere fact that that's the connection back to those people, like that's their hand, that's it's a special thing when we're thinking about that whakairo. You know, it was almost like you could breathe the air of the people that put them on there. And it didn't matter who they were or what time it was or how long ago. You know, whakapapa is continuous, but then it's contracted as well, eh? So being in that space, breathing, that ha is, it was special.
Tū te ihi te wehi te mano kaitau I kati mamo waitaha whānau haramai te toki honi e hui e taiki e.
Today, the Department of Conservation works closely with local Māori and Heritage New Zealand to protect sites of cultural importance in Fiordland. Senior Heritage Advisor Matt Schmidt explains.
For Fiordland we have a 4-year heritage plan, and that's a collective sort of approach to how we're going to manage heritage in Fiordland, and so that directs what places we'll concentrate on. And yeah, the main thing is iwi sites. Clearly all sites are important, but with climate change and coastal erosion in the fjords, it's the iwi sites are probably most at risk.
Rakituma also became a place of refuge during the 17th and 18th centuries for Kati Māmoe in their long-running confrontation with Kaitahu, as the latter group steadily extended its domination over most of Te Waipounamu. Giving ground before the newcomers, the older Māmoe communities gradually withdrew south and westwards, some eventually withdrawing right here into the rugged fastnesses of Fiordland.
With a lot of the iwi Māori skirmishes and a lot of those battles that were running up and down these coastlines, where people trying to get that utu but sometimes overbalancing the utu. So the tikanga of keeping things in balance was very important. Now,
here on Matauira, just inside the Rakituma, on this sheer headland jutting out by Te Whara Beach, they built Pā a Te Whara. It was an ideal location for fortification, seemingly impregnable.
The first known attack came from Kaitahu chief Tarawai of Pukekura in Otago harbour. He held a deep grievance against the people of this pā, who had formerly been his close neighbours in Otago, and nearly succeeded in killing him there in an earlier battle. That grievance brought him all the way southwest on their trail in 2 war canoes, wakataua, ostensibly coming in friendship.
The locals weren't fooled though, and during the night, as Tarawai's waka lay offshore, a Māmoe warrior swam out and quietly pulled it ashore. Tarawai and his warriors were then seized and taken captive. Now Tarawai was a big man, brave and resourceful, and he had a history of daring escapes from his enemies. But this time when he tried to break free, he slipped on some green flax and he was overwhelmed by his captors. Most of the men from his waka were now killed, but in the violent melee that followed, a mortally wounded Tarawai and one other survivor launched themselves into the surf and floated out to sea. The second waka, captained by Tarawai's nephew, quickly made its escape and went back to Pukekura at the head of Otago harbour for reinforcements. These duly arrived here in the dead of night and paddled silently past the pā, going further up the inlet and hiding their wakataua in the bush there. At dawn, one of their number posed as a seal wallowing in the surf. Now it was an old trick, but Kati Māmoe fell for the bait and came down to harvest this unexpected windfall of food. The Kaitahu warriors, hidden around the bush, leapt out and wiped out the unprepared defenders of the pā, and the way up the steep slope was then open, and utu for Tarawai's death was now claimed in the traditional bloody manner. But that wasn't the end of the story. A Kati Māmoe fishing party who had been working up the sound a bit further came back now, and cruising past they saw the hidden Kaitahu waka exposed by the light of day and took it in tow. Then from their vantage point safely out at sea here, they could see exactly what was going on up on Pā a Te Whara. There wasn't much they could do to stop the pillaging of their pā, but they must have taken some consolation as they took off to another Māmoe site in Tamatea Duskistown, taking with them their enemy's sole means of getting away from this incredibly isolated spot. The Kaitahu victors, meanwhile, were left stranded here on Matauira.
It's fascinating coming down the back of the island here, from the seaside, just looking at the imposing cliffs. And as we were steaming past here, I was thinking to myself, yeah, that looks perfect. No one's going to sneak up on you up on those cliffs. And when we started climbing up, it's like, yeah, okay, I can see that if you're coming up here, you're coming up for a nice a yarn instead of a fight. This is absolutely stunning. There's a cliff that just looks right out to sea. You can see the headlands over here. Just off my shoulder here, there's this just beautiful long beaches. I tell you, it's a perfect day to be up on the top of Pātewhara. It's a real special feeling to be here, listening to our stories, to our oral history, to that history that's been recorded on paper, following the exploits of those people that ended up battling in these places, those people of the Māmoe and the Tahu when they come down. And understanding and the family lines that come out of those, knowing my lines that hook into that whakapapa, and knowing that all through all that space, this lower quarter or the lower half of the South Island, we'd wander around making mischief in places like this, So as soon as I sort of come up there and I looked at that beach, I thought, yeah, I could see someone rolling around on the sound making seal noises down there. Each of our whānau have a different story, same story, but a different variation on the story and how it goes. Even with that tariwa, there are multiple outcomes of actually what did happen and who was right and who was wrong and who the goodies and baddies, all of those sorts of things. With that, each of our whānau, we've got our own stories of places and how our tūpuna click in and add into those stories, those pūrākau of those pakiwaitara, of those stories that inform who we are.
Some oral traditions of Pātewhara have the stranded Ngāi Tahu victors never been heard of again.
All except for Tarawai. After their early defeat, he and his companion, it is said, made their way across to one of these caves in the cliff face at Cavern Head, one bay over. Struggling into its depths, Tarawai lay down on a shelf-like recess in the rock, and there he died. His companion laid out Tarawai's body in the traditional burial posture and laid his paunamumeri beside him, and there he left him. He probably didn't notice the trickle of water that was dripping onto Tarawai's face. But in 1877, when Walter Trail, an Orkney Islander who'd settled on Stewart Island, was exploring these caves, he got the fright of his life when he came across a large body entombed in a crust of limestone.
Trail withdrew respectfully and sent word to the chief government scientist, Sir James Hector, asking his advice on what he should do. Hector, of course, was keen to examine the remains and asked Trail to cut out a stone block around them and ship it to him in Wellington.
A month later, Trail returned, suitably equipped for the extrication of the body, but to his surprise, the petrified figure was gone.
Maori crew on a nearby whaling vessel had evidently heard about the potential desecration of the old chief and had removed and hidden him to prevent any such violation of tapu.
They missed the chief's prized mere, however, and it was recovered later in the century by fossickers who prized it out of the limestone. What an amazing confirmation of those oral traditions of Tarawai's dramatic end.